Hi, and welcome back. We're going to continue in section 2 looking at LGBT psychosocial issues. LGBT folks often experience isolation, depression, anxiety, addiction, family and societal rejection, domestic violence, poverty, abuse, and suicidality. Oftentimes, these things occur as a result of responses to oppression or discrimination or prejudicial attitudes on a micro to macro level, both with regard to overt and covert forms of oppression, or struggling with the realities of navigating a lack of hetero and or cisgender privilege. This can result, as you can see, in unique generational differences or struggles for LGBTQ folks. Older adults, sometimes who are aging in homophobic, biphobic, or transphobic environments, can feel their relationships are disrespected, or even their very ability to be housed or considered in the gender that fits their gender identity that fits for them. Folks who are Gen Xers are often in midlife or even early adulthood, can struggle with career-based issues or classic developmental struggles of working with or caring for aging parents as well as kids. And those who are millennials often can struggle with issues related to bullying, suicidality, abuse, or other environmental vulnerabilities, including but not limited to poverty or homelessness. Having said that, from a strengths-based perspective, it is important to recognize the role of resiliency that many LGBTQ folks experience and encounter and express on a daily basis. All right. So one challenging statistic that we can take a look at, some of the biggest problems according to the Human Rights Campaign in 2012. You can see LGBT youth, one of their primary struggles is their family or their parents not accepting them, difficulties at school, afraid to be out or open about themselves, in general, issues related to clinical concerns, eating disorders, self-harm, depression, suicidality, etc. They also then looked at non-LGBT youth, asking the same question: what's the most difficult problem facing you in your life these days? And as you can see, their biggest problem was trouble with classes, exams, grades, etc., college and career decisions, financial problems, paying for college, getting a job, etc. So the differences are quite clear that could result in some unique challenges, specifically working with LGBT youth. I'd like to take a moment to look at a clinical concern that certainly has come up for LGBT youth, and that is suicidality. As mentioned previously, different sources of oppression, homophobia, heterosexism, biphobia, and transphobia are rampant in our society. We know from very new research, LGB youth are 5 times more likely to attempt and commit suicide than their straight counterparts. And shockingly, 83% of trans youth have had thoughts of suicide, and 54% of them have attempted suicide. Some brand new data, according to the Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2015, actually increases the likelihood of suicidality in LGBT youth. 60% of lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth responded to the survey, reported that they felt so sad or hopeless that they stopped doing some of their usual activities, and 40% seriously considered suicide. Specifically looking at some tragic data, 34% of LGBT students report being bullied in school. 1 in 10 report missing school because they are afraid of their own safety. LGBT people are more likely to be the target of hate crimes. 40% of homeless youth are LGBT. And the number one reason that they're on the streets is, in fact, family rejection. This brings a lot of other concerns. Marco Salsa highlighted some in 2002 from a qualitative study, looked at some LGBT youth concerns. 1/4 threatened with violence, more than 10% have been physically attacked, 21% feared physical attack, over a third of them had made a suicide attempt. Even more alarmingly, trans youth factors were even worse. 96% harassed at school, 83% harassed at school, 21% self-mutilated, 71% were sexually assaulted. A lot of tragic outcomes in this instance. That is not to frame LGBT youth as folks who have mental illness. However, one of the biggest challenges for LGBT youth is dealing with a lot of prejudice or discrimination from their various socialization sources on a regular basis. And that brings us to the personal is political. In social work, we often deal, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the role of social justice, and that brings the notion of advocacy into account. As we know, the Trump administration just recently withdrew Title IX guidance supporting trans people with higher education, and the Supreme Court decided to send the case of trans student Gavin Grimm back to the Fourth Circuit for reconsideration. This was a student who was trying to use the bathroom in a school system, school setting that fit his gender identity, and it was, in fact, in essence, sent back down to the Fourth Circuit. One of the biggest concerns for trans students that we hear on a regular basis around issues related sociopolitically like this is that they often feel uncared for or unprotected by adults and or the systems in place that are designed to try to protect them. Hundreds of thousands of transgender students receive a clear message. The law was on their side, the group said. By rescinding the guidance today, the Trump administration has taken the opposite stance. They have sent a deeply troubling message for students that the administration will not stand up for student civil rights. This is just one example of a policy-based issue that can affect LGBT folks. Please note this is a trigger warning. Seth Walsh was in fact a young man who in the 7th grade actually came home from school and was bullied on a regular basis. He committed suicide quite a while ago in 2011. However, he, as you can see, Seth appeared to be acting normally after one rough bullying incident at school. He showered and asked to borrow a pen from his mother to write a note. And he said he was going to play with the dogs in the backyard. His horrified mother indeed found him later at the tree and fought to save her child, even though she suspected it was futile. This is definitely one of the most significant and horrific presentations that we've seen regarding suicidality. There are too many examples of this, however. On a more national level, we can see a horrific example of terror here at home, of course, in the 2016 summer massacre at the gay nightclub Pulse in Orlando, Florida. This was an incident where a man came in and to a gay nightclub. It was Latin night, so there were many young people of color enjoying themselves in a gay nightclub, and of course that was targeted. That brings us to the importance, as we mentioned before, regarding intersectionality and the role that oppression and intersectionality play here. LGBT youth of color actually face really significant challenges of racism and homophobia and transphobia. Experience the greater discrimination from society as a whole. We know that youth of color are less likely to have told their parents that 80% of white LGBT youth were out to their parents, where 71% of Latinos were, 61% of African Americans were, 51% of Asian and Pacific Islanders were. So we can see the multiplicity of unique stressors that occur for LGBT youth of color. More than a third of LGBT youth of color had experienced physical violence because of their orientation, according to GLSEN. LGBT youth of color report feeling pressure to choose between their ethnic and their sexual identities. These youth are less likely to be involved in gay social and cultural activities than, in fact, their white counterparts. Looking at issues related to LGBT youth of color is really critical. Right, just a couple examples of some wonderful organizations that are doing great work for LGBT youth, specifically for LGBT youth of color, is Breakout and Buried Seeds, two organizations that are in fact doing wonderful, advocacy work and social support work for queer youth of color. We also know that while there are lots of LGBT youth who are in fact at risk for depression and suicidality, there are also some who are enjoying very, very happy and fulfilling lives and display tremendous amounts of resiliency. Often social workers see a skewed group of folks who are struggling on a regular basis in that context. Dan Savage, as a result of a lot of the suicides in 2011, began its Gets Better campaign. You could check out some of these that are in fact very inspiring and supportive and helpful. There have been some, it's basically a venue where older LGBT folks can record themselves talking about their own histories and their own stories. And being able to talk about how they coped with some of the challenges that they faced as young people. It's pretty inspiring. It is, however, important to note that there has been some critique of the It Gets Better campaign as it relates to looking at, for some folks, that it doesn't always get better and that there are some unique challenges that can be ongoing and tragic in that context. That brings us to a model that I want to highlight and quickly provide for you as we wrap up, and that's called a level of response. The levels of response model is a systematic analytic scale assessing the responses of individuals, organizations, and communities to LGBT people. The first level is rejecting punitive, and that basically is the LGBT folks are evil and should be punished. That mindset, often espoused by hate groups, neo-Nazis, the Westboro Baptist Church, and the KKK, other kind of hate groups that are often recognized by the Southern Poverty Law Center. The notion of LGBT folks are evil and should be punished. The second level is rejecting non-punitive. LGBT folks are sick and need help to change. Often this is thought of as to come in the form of reparative therapy. That is the ability to change a gay person into a straight person or a trans person into a cisgender person. We know from research that that just doesn't work. Sometimes people will utilize faith-based organizations as in ex-gay ministries. That is, if we just can pray the gay away, so to speak, that if someone has enough faith or they repent within the context of their value system, then they will suddenly be able to be straight and or cisgender. We know consistently from the research that such efforts often cause and or contribute to a lot of harm, leading to some of the psychosocial issues that we discussed earlier, including depression, cutting behavior, self-harm, suicidality, addictions, mental illness, violence, etc., etc. The third level of response is qualified acceptance. LGBT folks are okay, I just don't want to see it. I don't want to see anything that in some way, shape, or form reflects or highlights the aspects of who they are as a trans person or as a gay person. A great example of that is Don't Ask, Don't Tell in the U.S. military. That was just really all about hiding. Full acceptance, LGBT folks are a normal and natural part of our community. A good example, organization that espouses that particular perspective is PFLAG, Parents, Friends, and Families of Lesbians and Gays. This is certainly not the only one, but is an example of one. And finally, advocacy. LGBT folks are a normal and natural part of our community, and their rights should be protected. This is acknowledging the importance of looking at different organizations or institutions that can provide advocacy-related services. Certainly social work can fall in that perspective. Finally, some of the implications for this, look at, we can use the levels of response as a tool to assess individuals, families, groups, communities, and organizations. You can assess your own organization, assess the agencies that you're working with, and you can also assess yourself and your family system. Trevor is specifically referred to in this particular class. We encourage you to watch that film. It's about gay suicidality and asking yourself the question, assuming you were Trevor or loved someone who was, in the levels of response, what would be enough for you and why? Thanks so much, and continue to look forward to working with you in this class.